markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Equities advance after the worst S&P 500 rout in almost 2 years. So now, taking a look at the S&P 500, up about 1%. Same for the Dow, now up 1%, 414 points. The NASDAQ up more than 1%, 196 points. We head over to the two-year yield at 3.96%. That's up 4 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 3.85%, and that's up 5 basis points. Taking a look at commodities, we have spot gold lower, 2,388 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $76 a barrel. WTI crude, $73 a barrel. We had some more Fed speak. You had San Francisco Fed boss Mary Daly saying that the labor market softening. She also indicated officials should begin cutting interest rates in the coming quarters. And it was a big day for Boeing, Spirit Aerosystem executives from both companies. They'll be questioned by the NTSB today and tomorrow to try and uncover any remaining mystery surrounding that 737 MAX 9 that lost that large fuselage panel midair back in January. Right now, Boeing shares down about 0.9%. Spirit Aerosystems, same there. And finally, the New York Times reporting Axios laying off about 10% of its staff, about 50 workers. In an email, its CEO said the changes, well, they're necessary to adapt to, quote, changes in the media business. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries all around the world. And one of our favorites is Jennifer Rie. She is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Litigation Analyst. There's literally no one better, internally or externally at Bloomberg, who knows this antitrust world better than she does.
Yeah, like I wouldn't call up Paul Weiss or Skadden or any of those firms. I'd just go to this fourth floor of Bloomberg, talk to Jen Rie.
100%, 100%. And this headline crossed yesterday, right as I was going to go on TV at around 3, that a judge ruled Monday that Google illegally monopolized the search market through exclusive deals. So it basically pays to get their search function on your phone. I'm just going to dumb that down for a second. This could be huge, not only for Google, but it could also be huge in terms of like Apple. They could lose billions potentially in revenue from this. So we wanted to bring in Jen to break it down. Jen, can you just explain to me in more detail kind of what the accusation is here?
Sure, of course, and thanks for all of your comments. So Google basically was found to be a monopolist in general search services, and I think that's probably no surprise, right? We all use Google. I think they have 80 or 90% of the search queries in market share. But specifically, what was found to be illegal was Google paying many other third parties, including Apple, Mozilla, Samsung, other OEMs, to set Google Search as the default search engine at all the access points that, where you need to access the internet. So for instance, behind a browser, behind Mozilla Firefox, or behind Apple Safari. And so what the judge said is, well, by placing Google as the default, this really blocks out all the other competitors, the search engine competitors. And at the end of the day, they can't get better if they can't get to customers, because search engines get better based on the number of searches done. And Google's got all those searches locked up. And that was anti-competitive because it was exclusionary and probably hindered innovation, might have hindered choice, and possibly hindered quality.
However, the stock is unchanged on the news here today, suggesting that the market doesn't really care. Should the market care here? Are there some remedies that might be really onerous on Google?
I think there could be. I think part of the reason the market's not really reacting is because this was just a liability phase. Mm-hmm. So the remedies have yet to be hashed out. And, that process could take 6 months. It could take even another year before we know what they are. And then Google will likely appeal and can seek to stay any remedy pending the appeal. And if that happens, you're looking at several years before there's any impact at all. But at the end of the day, the remedies could be onerous. First of all, the DOJ will seek structural change. I don't think they could win it here, but one of the requests they might have of the judge is to break apart parts of Google's business.
Wow.
Again, I think that's a long shot here. I don't think it'll happen. I think it's more likely that what the judge will say is, Google, you can't pay anymore to have that default position. And maybe the judge will say, Google, you have to share some of your data with some of these other search engines, or maybe some other new nascent search engine that comes into being after this remedy phase is finished.
Okay, so if that's the case, I wonder, does this change if President Trump wins the White House, or is this kind of like locked in?
You know, it's such an interesting issue right now, Alex, because one might have said if an administration changes from Democratic to Republican, it could change, and there might be more of a likelihood of a settlement. But you have J.D. Vance as former President Trump's vice presidential pick, and he actually is aligned with the idea of breaking up Google. He's pretty anti-big tech. I don't know how much he would influence the policy decisions of a Trump, DOJ, or FTC, but if he did, he would be all in on continuing to go after Google. So I think that possibility of some kind of a settlement that's easier on Google happening down the road is low.
Jen, I think if you stopped any person on the street, they would say, I got no problem with Google. Actually, it's great. It's changed my life for the better. Is this one of those issues where it's a solution in search of a problem here? And does that factor into remedies?
You know, exactly. You're thinking like a lawyer now, because
that hurt.
There's a lot of commentary when this case was brought that the DOJ brought the case, but they really don't have a solution, and they brought it before they knew what the solution would be. We're going to get into what they're going to suggest the solution, but Paul, exactly why you said, you know, people love Google, and this is exactly why I think the judge wouldn't do something structural, because he's not going to want to mess that up. People like Google. Google's essentially a free product, at least for people, not for advertisers. And it functions very well. And despite having a monopoly position, the judge did acknowledge that Google continues to innovate in the search area. So I think because of the desirability for consumers of the Google search engine, we're not going to see something structural. But I do think, obviously, the judge is going to have to impose some remedy because he found that the company is acting anti-competitively.
This is a weirdly unfair question to ask you. Is big tech too big? Like, do we have a big tech problem?
Well, I think that's what the current administration thinks, yes. But, you know, there's a disalignment here with our Supreme Court, because our Supreme Court has ruled over and over that it's not illegal in the United States to have a monopoly. And in fact, that's what we want all companies to work toward, because that's what will cause them to innovate and try to gain market share by lowering their prices. So at the end of the day, just being big, at least today, isn't illegal. The problem is the conduct of a company that's really big. And that's really what the DOJ and FTC are going after right now.
How about other tech companies? What does this mean for them?
You know, I think it's atmospherics, because there are different facts, different issues, different markets, and different market positions. You know, the case against Amazon, against Meta, there are more case against Apple. They're quite different, and these cases rest on the facts and the specifics. But what this does do, at least for Google, we have one more case coming up, a big one, against its ad tech stack that's going to trial this September. And now Google's been found to have monopolized two different parts of its business, its Play Store and now search. So psychologically, you know, it could influence a judge to think, well, they've been found to engage anti-competitively in two areas, why not in a third as well?
You know, Paul, this goes to your area, too. I was reading a piece today that big tech's AI problem is just going to buy smaller companies and getting their talent, right?
Right.
And I wonder if that has to kind of go away now, because if you have this kind of DOJ.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think what I understand from people like Jen is that some of these big tech companies, their hands are really tied in terms of big deals, at least.
Yeah, Jen, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Their hands have been tied for the last 3 years. Things could change a little bit with the new administration. I think there is no doubt, no matter who's elected, there will be some change in the leadership positions, the decision makers at the Department of Justice and Federal Trade Commission, and that could change things. But I do think big tech is still going to have a lot of trouble going forward trying to do any kind of a big deal.
All right, Jen, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Awesome. One of the best in the business, the best, if not. Jennifer Reed, Bloomberg Intelligence, a senior litigation analyst, joining us on Google being accused of monopolizing search and sort of the ramifications of that as well. It is interesting, though, that markets are super taking this in stride. Like yesterday when the news broke, the stock was down like a couple percent, and it didn't really move at all from that.
I mean, tech investors have been used to this from the Microsoft days back in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and even they look to big tobacco, and they say, look at, and big tobacco is just powered right through all that litigation risk here. So you get to these companies that get to such a size and such a strength that it really doesn't matter. The horse is kind of out of the barn here. So we'll keep an eye on that. Google shares up 1% here today on the news. We'll have more coming up with the Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. One of the world's biggest producers of heavy machinery, talking about Caterpillar, reported second quarter earnings beat expectations. That was thanks to stronger pricing, and that helped offset that drop in sales. Now, it's also said its annual profit probably be higher than previously expected. Caterpillar is a key supplier to industries from construction and mining to energy and transportation. Its shares up about 4%. Uber shares on the rise after posting steady gains. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has the breakdown.
I think where you are seeing outperformance, though, in some of these numbers is their second quarter EPS, 47 cents versus 18 cents year over year. So that's perhaps seeing a little bit of a positive response there. But nevertheless, it looks like Uber now returning profitability, and they're saying they are still continuing to see demand for rides and for their delivery business as well.
Uber up nearly 8%. To travel now, where shares of Hyatt are up about 1.5%. And this is after a reported adjusted earnings per share for the second quarter that beat estimates. Then we go to Celsius Holdings. You know, they make those energy drinks. The kids just love them. Well, those shares up about 2.5%, posted second quarter revenue profit that topped expectations. And then we get to Planet Fitness, where probably a lot of people drink Celsius. Those shares are climbing. They're up about 9%, topped estimates for adjusted profit and for revenue. And then from gyms to fast food, Yum Brands posted weaker than expected sales in the second quarter, but shares are higher. They're up about 2.5%. It reported deeper than expected declines at KFC, Pizza Hut, but Taco Bell saw some growth thanks to its Cantina chicken menu. Not bad. Palantir Technologies raised its annual outlook, pointing to continued demand for its AI software. Palantir now up about 10%. And finally, Bayer beat estimates. That is your company news at this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from the Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown in Manhattan. We're also on YouTube, so check us out on there as well. We keep you up to date on all the business and economic and finance news you need, and also world and national news. And for that, we go to John Tucker. John?
And let's start with Vice President Kamala Harris tapping Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as a running mate. The pick makes for a balanced ticket, complementing Harris across demographic, cultural, and political lines. And Bloomberg's Joe Matthew, host of Bloomberg Balance of Power, says the pick seems to do no harm.
This is the safe bet here. This is going to make the Democratic Party happy. The establishment seems to like him. Progressives are not going to complain about him, and she's got somebody with some gravitas here.
The 60-year-old Walz, less well known as a national figure, but popular in his home state, especially among the 91% of Democratic voters who approve of his job performance. Harris expected to appear alongside Walz at a rally later today in Philadelphia. Even though Debbie's been downgraded to tropical storm, forecasters warning the heavy rainfall and dangerous flash flood threat will not abate for several more days. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper declaring a state of emergency, and residents in Raleigh are preparing for the storm.
You got to go get toilet paper and milk and everything else because nobody has anything at home.
The storm has led to several fatalities, and experts say the worst is yet to come as the system is expected to stall over the southeast region. It could pummel the southeast with widespread areas of up to 30 inches of rain. And it's primary day in several states. Washington state voters deciding between incumbent Congressman Dan Newhouse, one of the last remaining House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump, and two conservative rivals endorsed by Trump. Michigan voters will decide which Republican and Democratic candidates will compete in November for the state's U.S. Senate seat left open by longtime Democratic Senator Debbie Stebenow's retirement. Michigan's open Senate seat, one of a handful of races nationwide that will determine control of the upper chamber come November. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Alex.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. Here's an article that I thought it'd be fun to talk about. Well, not fun, but something to talk about. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, apparently wants to build a super luxury, fancy, glitzy hotel in Albania and Serbia on an island that served as an Albanian military base during the Cold War. And apparently it's pretty isolated from the west of from what was one of the world's most reclusive countries. Buildings are decaying. You got bunkers that are overgrown with vegetation. About 300 miles north, you got 2 bombed tower blocks. Took over a major boulevard there in Belgrade, and he wants to build a luxury hotel.
Why not? I mean, luxury is growing, right? I mean, I'm not sure I've thought of that part of the world.
Oh, it's a beautiful part of the world.
I know it's a beautiful part of the
Stunning.
world. I just don't think of like luxury resorts there.
It's the kind of place Charlie Pellet would visit.
That's a good point. That is a
He
very
doesn't
good
do
point.
luxury though. Like he might go there as it is now.
Well, it's like a
But
bombed-out military
yeah,
base.
but when
It's
they make it
perfect for him.
luxury, he ain't going there. But it is a very volatile part of the world, right? A corner of Europe, politically and ethnically as well. And so there's been some controversy about how to safeguard the environment, the cultural heritage in that region. Like this also didn't happen like hundreds of years ago. This is still relatively recent memory.
Yep, and he has a fund, Jared Kushner does, a $3 billion fund. It's backed by Middle Eastern investors, including about $2 billion from Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. So he's got plenty of cash, I guess, to invest there and see if he can get some additional backers. And could be a unique part of the world, and maybe that's kind of where that set of customers that like to find unique destinations. Maybe that could be one of them.
I mean, it's like a deserted island with 1,400 acres.
Yes.
It's near Croatia. Croatia's like super hot right now, like in terms of going on vacation and stuff like that. So things might be getting more expensive there. I don't know.
Jersey Shore, that's kind of what I think is hot.
It is, yes.
It's a hot place to go.
It's the place to be.
But I guess Croatia's also pretty good, I guess.
Yes. I mean, it might be a little cheaper to go to Jersey
Close
Shore.
Yeah.
But, gasoline prices, that's TBD. All right, coming up, we're going to have a lot more for you in the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence. Laura Davison, Bloomberg politics reporter, will be joining us on Kamala Harris's VP pick. Was it smart? What does it deliver? You're looking at a market's having a rebound Tuesday, turnaround Tuesday. Will it last? This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are 2 big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to kick it off with Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, on Kamala Harris VP pick, Tom Walls. So we'll break that down. What does it mean for the ticket? Mandeep Singh is going to join us here in studio, senior technology analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Talk to us about Uber. Put up some pretty solid numbers. So good for the ride-sharing business. Peter Cheer, head of macro strategy at Academy Securities, is to discuss the latest market activity. So a lot coming up in this hour. Right now, let's kick it all off with Mr. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much indeed. Let's call this Rebound Tuesday. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing after yesterday's sell-off. S&P right to the numbers, up 82, 52.69 right now on the S&P 500 index. That is a gain now of 1.6%. Dow Industrials up 464, up 1.2%. You recall yesterday we had the Dow slumping by roughly 1,000 points. NASDAQ up 268 right now, up by 1.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.7%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares advancing now by just about 1.6%. 10-year at 3.85% with a 2-year 3.97%. Gold is down 0.9%, 23.88 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2% after yesterday's swoon, 73.82 a barrel. Stocks rose as dip buyers waded back into the market after a roughly $6.5 trillion sell-off from global equities over the past few weeks. All major groups in the S&P 500 are advancing. Now, what about the Federal Reserve and the outlook there? Neil Dutt is head of U.S. economics at Renaissance Macro Research.
I've been saying it, they need to get on with it, but I think the longer they wait, the more they'll end up having to do, which is why I say that not only will they go 50, but I do think they'll go at least 50 more in the final 2 meetings of the year.
Neil Dutta of Renaissance Macro Research. NVIDIA shares up today by 5%. Apple does remain lower, down by 0.8%. Shares of Tesla down 1.2%. Microsoft shares, they're up by about 2.3%. Cannot ignore Palantir after earnings, up now by about 11.5%. So again, recapping here, we've got somewhat of a rebound after yesterday's declines, with the S&P up by 82 points, up by 1.6%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thanks so much, Charlie Pellet. We appreciate that. We say Turnaround Tuesday. Go with the alliteration. Turnaround Tuesday.
I like it.
Yeah, you got to do that.
Good.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so we are higher on equities. I'm still a little skeptical if that's actually going to hold out, but the individual moves are still quite interesting. We just talked about the antitrust issue with Google in terms of its search, so I wanted to check in on Alphabet stock and what it is doing. Norma Linda, Bloomberg News, joins us now. Does Alphabet stock care about this at all?
I mean, so it is Turnaround Tuesday, but I am seeing Alphabet shares in the red. And of course, this is after that antitrust suit that has really been the topic of conversation. Right now, we're seeing shares down a little bit less than 0.1%. Now, this is off of that ruling that a U.S. judge said that Google illegally monopolized the search market through exclusive deals with companies from the likes of Apple and Samsung, essentially putting it in a position to where Google would be the preferred search engine on a lot of these different devices. And they're saying that's pushing out other search providers. Analysts say that a modest stock move was expected, but of course we are watching because Alphabet says that it does intend to appeal the verdict. But really interesting stuff as we're keeping an eye on this stock. We're seeing JP Morgan analyst Doug Anmuth saying that the decision is a negative for Google. The best outcome would have been preserving the status quo.
Makes sense. I mean, yeah. You can keep doing what you're doing.
I'm a veteran of the Microsoft days with the European Union, and it's just you write a check, you move on. Maybe you have some remedies to your business things, but that's kind of what investors, I think, have gotten used to. So I'll have to see how it plays out.
I mean, it's good perspective to know, we've seen this movie before. It's not the first time.
But it's a U.S. What's really different is it's the U.S. regulators as opposed to European regulators. So usually the U.S. regulators have taken a very light touch to technology, which Silicon Valley would then argue that's why we're so successful, because you haven't stifled
because you don't have that.
I mean, the conversation has been whether or not this is going to ripple into other companies. Exactly. You know, we're seeing all these other big tech names, and they really have been under fire for antitrust concerns. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, good stuff.
All right, Lucid, that stock up by 2.6%.
Yes.
Earnings, yeah?
I was going to say we're seeing the move pairing, but it was earlier up as much as 13%. Now, this is after a large cash infusion that we saw, $1.5 billion, and this is coming from Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. Cantor Fitzgerald upgraded the stock to neutral from sell, and this is after on the heels of a $1 billion injection that we just saw back in March. But this $1.5 billion is 50% convertible, 50% unsecured loan. But as we mentioned earlier on the show, this is still in focus as we're looking at the negative free cash flow that this company has, with it being around $750 million just this past quarter. And so we really are keeping an eye on this, especially as the stock doesn't seem to be making as much progress in terms of scaling. But I was watching Bloomberg Television earlier where they had a conversation with the CEO, Peter Rawlson, and he says that this is just a blip in the timeline, and that he does see that they are still seeing demand. And unlike someone else, he said, I'm not distracted by politics in terms of how this will be moving forward.
Very good.
So, guess we can all guess who he was talking about there.
Okay. And then wrapping up with Uber?
Yes, Uber. Those shares are up for the most since February, up as much as 7.3%. Now, this is coming after better than expected orders. We are still seeing demand for rideshare and delivery services, and the company is saying that its gross bookings grew 19%. I know, Paul, we were just chatting earlier as to whether or not there is a decision between Uber and Lyft when you pull out your phone. For me, I do go back and forth looking for the cheapest option, but we are seeing strength for Uber.
Let me ask you a question, because you're of a different demo than I am, to put it politely. Uber Eats.
Okay.
Do you do the food delivery thing?
See, funny thing is, I'm actually a Grubhub girl because they give you $5 back if you actually have your food delivered more than 5 minutes late, if I'm not mistaken. So I tend to go that route and use the money back again. And Uber Eats, out of all of the apps, I feel like tends to have a lot of the extra hidden fees that end up being there right at the end of checkout. Not for me.
I will not support that in my household.
Me neither. Me neither.
No.
I get mad at my husband. I'm like, use your feet.
You said walk to the store,
go out and use your feet.
hop in the car, and go get it
Right,
yourself.
burn some carbon, go get it yourself. All right,
Traditional.
Norma Linda, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Norma Linda, she does all that stock market stuff here for Bloomberg. We appreciate that. Speaking of Uber, let's go to Mandeep Singh.
Let's do it.
He knows what's going on with these companies. Mandeep Singh, a technology analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's all over these ride-sharing companies. You know, Uber, I think, I mean, Mandeep's going to be joining us in studio. I mean, we just picked him.
Yes,
I mean,
he runs
he's
into the
literally running
studio.
in our studio. So he covers all these ride-sharing things, and I don't know. He's the one that got pitched me on this whole Uber thing, and I'm on it. I'm on it. I think
And he was right.
It's the greatest thing in the world. Uber, talk to us about the quarter, Mandeep. What did you see?
Good print, solid top-line growth. I think the fact that we are talking about a business that's generating $40 billion run rate in a year, I mean, clearly they have the scale. The question for me when it comes to Uber 5 years down the line, you know, long-term play, how disrupted their business model is going to be from the rollout of autonomous vehicles and robo-taxis. And I know, you know, it's not the right time to talk about it, but when you look at Waymo and how successful they've been in the 3 cities that they have launched, I mean, the part of the call was about how Uber is integrating Waymo inside their app.
What is Waymo?
Waymo is Google's autonomous driving unit. I mean, they have about 300 cars in San Francisco, similarly in a couple of other cities, Arizona. And what they have shown is their technology is ready for prime time. I mean, they have to get regulatory approvals to do it at scale. But that changes the unit economics completely. Right now, we are talking about a business model where cost per mile is like $5 to $7. Waymo can, at scale, they can do it 3 or 4 times cheaper. So suddenly the take rate model gets disrupted. Now, again, it's not hit prime time, but that's what Tesla is striving for. And the risk for Uber and Lyft is they will get disintermediated.
Wait, so it's not the fact that Uber would just go get a bunch of robo-taxis and use them, and eventually that would pay off over time because they're not paying drivers. It's not that scenario.
It's not that scenario because both these companies want to roll out the robo-taxis themselves as opposed to using an Uber. And even if Uber was to get involved, their take rates would be way lower than 30%. Right now, they are getting 30% of every ride. Let's say it's a $50 ride. Uber makes at least 30%. That's a pretty healthy take rate. With the autonomous driving equation, first, Tesla wants to go solo. They don't want to partner with any of the ride-sharing guys. That's one risk. Waymo is on Uber, but my sense is they also want to kind of broaden out their reach, and they will deploy the technology themselves. And in fact, Alphabet allocated $5 billion in CapEx this quarter on Waymo's rollout. So,
all right, I mean, all right, it's bad enough that I get in a car with somebody I've never met, a total stranger. That's crazy enough to think about. Am I getting in a car that's a robo-taxi? Is that really going to be a thing, and if so, when?
I mean, these vehicles are monitored. So if you
by
go
the way,
to
I have a Vespa scooter, by the way, so I don't necessarily need them for the shore, but go ahead.
But just go to San Francisco right now. You can order a Waymo ride.
You can.
You can. And just get that experience. I think every consumer who has taken a Waymo ride loves that experience.
Really?
Uber talked about, they acknowledged the threat on their call, but they also think the rollout will be slow, and they are positioning themselves by seeking all these partnerships. They're partnering with BYD for 100,000 vehicles. That was big news last week.
Well, then why would it be exclusionary? Like if Tesla rolls it out themselves, why is it that it just means more competition? It doesn't mean it's exclusionary. Like with Lyft, like you guys price compare with Lyft, there's room for more than just one.
There is, but then it goes back to being the scale player and having that 30% take rates. The reason why Uber has done much better than Lyft is because it's a scale player. And it can charge that 30% take rate because it has the liquidity in its marketplace, the supply-demand matching, the best ETAs, the most options that it can offer to its riders. So, like, marketplaces are all about scale. The moment you have more than 3 or 4 competitors, right now it's a duopoly, and still we see how badly Lyft is doing relative to Uber. If you have more competition, that's not good news. But again, this is further out. This quarter was solid. Nothing goes wrong for Uber until this robotaxi rollout plays out. So we're talking a few quarters out scenario.
Market cap for Uber, 132 billion. Market cap for Lyft, 4 billion. What happened?
Well, I mean, Uber clearly has the scale, and DoorDash has done similarly very well on the food delivery side. So you've got two scale players when it comes to ride sharing and food delivery, and they have the most supply. I mean, one challenge with this business model is gross margins can never be as attractive as your software companies.
Yep.
And that's what we keep finding with Uber. It's like they're still a 40% gross margin business at an aggregate level. So where do you...
And for him, that's terrible. I mean, for most of the world, that's
like,
a great gross margin. But for Mandeep, if he doesn't see like 80% gross margin, he doesn't even pay attention to it. Mandeep Singh, thank you so much. Mandeep Singh, he leads our tech coverage along with that fella Anurag Rana, lead our global team technology research, one of the best on the street. We had some political news today. Vice President Harris taps Minnesota Governor Mr. Walz to be her vice presidential candidate on that ticket. Laura Davison joins us, Bloomberg Politics editor. So, Laura, what's the feeling within D.C. about the selection by VP Harris?
This is a little bit of a surprise pick. We've heard Walz's name come up, as these discussions had gone on over the past couple weeks. But Walz is someone who was relatively unknown just prior to really Harris emerging as the Democratic standard bearer following Biden's departure from the race. So, he's a very popular governor, in Minnesota, but not someone who's been on the national stage as much. But he really emerged because he was sort of able to capture on the zeitgeist of the moment. He, kind of coined the phrase "weird" now that sort of as an insult to Republicans and their policies that Harris and others have started using. And so he was sort of able to be seen as someone who could go on the attack, but also, sort of be relatable and likable to blue-collar workers.
What does that mean then about how Kamala Harris feels about Pennsylvania?
So it's clear from this decision, sort of the main other person she was looking at was Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. He's also very popular in his state and would have been sort of the best choice if she wants to make sure she wins Pennsylvania. So either, the kind of a couple of takeaways here, she feels confident about her chances outside of Pennsylvania, that there's, multiple ways to win the race. But also Shapiro had some negatives. He was very staunchly pro-Israel, something that, is a divisive issue among Democrats. And one of the things that sort of her allies pointed out, after this decision was made, that it was Walz she had more of a personal rapport with. So that was something that she was looking at very closely. Plus, he also had a record in Minnesota that had more middle class wins. So things like free lunches for school children, expanding paid leave. Shapiro has less experience as a governor. He's only been in office for 2 years. Has a little bit more of a mixed record, for Democrats. For Walz here kind of helps her shore up the progressive base.
Does this pick say anything about how Kamala Harris wants to run this campaign in terms of being more of a centrist versus appealing maybe more to the liberal part of the Democratic Party? What do we think?
Yeah, so Walz is someone who does appeal on a policy level to progressives. He has, someone who comes from rural Minnesota. The district that he represented when he was in the House is now represented by a Republican. But his values and sort of the issues that he champions are much more sort of the progressive wing. Things like paid family leave and expanding, student loans and student loan forgiveness, rather. Shapiro is much more moderate, much more business friendly. So this is sort of, an interesting, mix here. But because he does have those Midwestern roots, he is from a rural area. He is someone who, has been a gun owner, though has become much more vocal about, gun control in recent years. He has this sort of mix that he's able to, not alienate either the moderate side or the progressive side of the party.
Terry Haynes of Pangea said this was Harris's first negative. He didn't like it. He was basically saying this was a safe pick. It showed that she's really worried about the campaign. Is anyone in the zeitgeist that you're talking to sort of saying that?
Yes, I mean there is sort of a different schools of thought here, but that that Walz was someone that wasn't going to offend anybody, and so therefore he's safe. But he may also not have the same upside potential that someone like Shapiro had. Shapiro on the ticket, the chances of winning Pennsylvania and therefore potentially the whole race went up. But he also has more negatives here. So she was sort of taking the path of least resistance on this pick versus someone like Shapiro or even Mark Kelly, who had some clashes with labor unions in the past. So that it was sort of another issue that why his name didn't rise to the fore.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate it. It's definitely a crazy time. And also, you have such a short amount of time with that. Laura Davison, Bloomberg Politics editor, joining us. But, so truncated.
Yep. And now they hit the road like immediately. I mean, I think 7 swing states in 5 days or something along those lines. So they're going to be hitting the road. And obviously former President Trump and J.D. Vance are out there as well. So it's be a relatively short period of time until we get to Election Day.
Yeah, that's going to be something. If only a countdown clock there. All right, we're looking at the markets here. S&P is up 1.3%. Coming up, Peter Cheer, head of macro strategy at Academy Securities, will be joining us for his take on the last 48 hours of market action.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. S&P 500 index back above 5,200. We're calling it Turnaround Tuesday. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and yes, the Russell 2000 all back in the green. A 0.9% jump right now for the Dow Industrials, up by 333 points. S&P up 65, gain now of 1.3%. NASDAQ, the composite index, up 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100 index also up 1.3%. And the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares gaining now by 1.1%. 10-year at 3.85%. The 2-year 3.98%. Spot gold down $28 the ounce, $23.82, drop of 1.2%. And West Texas Intermediate crude, a little changed, up by just 5 cents now, $72.99 a barrel. Cannot ignore the move in Bitcoin after yesterday's plunge, rebounding today by 3.2%. Bitcoin now with a 56,000 handle, 56,140. We were just talking with Armandeep Singh about Uber. Uber shares rallying after earnings, up now by 7.8%. Crosstown San Francisco-based rival Lyft will report tomorrow. Lyft shares up now by 1.4%. So again, recapping, all major groups in the S&P 500 advancing. Very different tone than this time yesterday. Stocks higher as dip buyers wade back into the market. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. We're also streaming live on that internet thing, YouTube, at youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find the broadcast here. Boy, what a movement in these markets over the past 48 hours. Big sell-off yesterday. Even a little bit of a panic in the morning, it felt like. But then turning it around here on Tuesday. Peter Cheer, head of macro strategy at Academy Securities. He joins us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. Peter, you've got some experience. You've been around the block once or twice. What do you make of kind of the last several days of trading?
You know, I think we're starting to see a little bit of an unwind. We saw a little bit of fear. I think whether it's the carry trade or not, it kind of pushed us in. There's a lot of leverage in the system. A lot of people have been selling volatility. A lot of people bought, full in on the AI story. I think those are fading a little bit. And yeah, we're getting a little bounce today. I think we're going to see more selling, though.
Exactly. That was what I was worried about. Like
dead cat bounce, which I was shocked we had to explain that to somebody. But anyway,
whatever. Why do you think it's going to be more selling? Because I was looking at the systemic funds and worried there, the gamma hedging, the carry trade not being done. What do you see that tells you more selling?
Yeah, I think a lot of those, and even on a simple level, you just look at QQQ, it took in inflows, SPY took in inflows, and even more esoteric, TQQQ, which is a levered, took in inflows yesterday. And
that's a levered S&P 500?
Leveraged NASDAQ 100.
NASDAQ, okay, thank you.
And then my favorite one, I think, is NVDL, which is a leveraged NVIDIA ETF, and that had inflows yesterday. So I would like to see outflows there to really believe we've had some capitulation.
So what does that tell you, though? It just tells you that it's still a buy-the-dip mentality in some way?
I think it's still a buy-the-dip mentality, but I think, yesterday everyone was so calm. Hey, don't worry about this. It's all fine. People reacted. I think there's more going on. The economy's slowing. We have stretched valuations. The Fed is not going to be super supportive of markets. They've got their own agenda, which is to kind of make sure we don't get inflation again. So I think we're very ripe for selling on any sort of earnings weakness or economic data weakness.
What have you thought about the earnings? Let's go back to something that presumably still matters in the markets. What are you making of earnings?
That we finally have a higher standard for what's going on with AI. 6 months ago, certainly if you just raised your hand and said, we have an AI strategy, you were rewarded. The chip companies were all rewarded almost no matter what. And it feels like people are putting a little bit of scrutiny on this, saying where valuations are. And unfortunately, I think so many of these stocks got heavily piled into that they're a little bit overbought. And the other part that we've been talking a lot more about is the concept of passive, right? Passive, so whether you put your money into the S&P 500 or NASDAQ 100, about 50 cents on the dollar are going to just a handful of stocks. So that fed the momentum on the way up, and I think it's going to fuel the momentum, unfortunately, on the way down.
Right, so it can go up in a straight line, and then it can also go down in a straight line. It doesn't have to go down differently. Do you think the Fed should cut 50 basis points in September?
I don't think so yet. I think, I think they should have actually cut in July, and I would have done 50 in July just to get this out of the way.
You would have done 50 in July. Why 50 in July?
You've seen a nice slowdown in everything on the inflation front. The only thing that's holding up CPI is the owner's equivalent rent and gosh only knows why we still use something like that. Anything that's, a contemporaneous measure of inflation, or rent, whether it's Zillow, is showing rents of decline. The other thing that's kept CPI up was auto insurance. We're not seeing that come through. So I think they could have reacted to that. I think the job number have been overstated. I don't like what's going on in the private. The JOLTS even had a big reduction in private jobs available. Get ahead of this. Plus, I really am scared. A 50 bips cut in September, right in the heat of the election, I think it's just going to become a political nightmare, and people are going to be screaming at the Fed. It's going to detract from the Fed's mission, I think, which I think they are very good at. I would have cut now, see where it goes, and let it play out.
Once the Fed does begin cutting, it's been such a long time, for at least in my mind, how do they do it? Did they kind of go 25 basis points every meeting? Did they skip meetings? How do they do it?
That's kind of my view. I would have liked to see a 50 on the first one and then wait 2 or 3 months. I think in September, unless the data comes in so weak, they do 25 and then push the next one off till after the election. I think a 50 in September, if it really sparks a big equity rally or something, will be troublesome. They want to not reignite inflation. So to me, we get 25 and then they wait a month or two. And it really is going to be dependent on the data. I think the data is going to turn out weak and justify more cuts, but it might not.
What do you think of the corporate credit market? I was looking at high yield spreads yesterday, and I know that they rose, and I get that. But compared to other events, it's still so calm.
Yeah, I think credit really isn't the valuation story, particularly investment grade credit, right? The companies are great. Across the board, there's still cash flow. The economy is still growing to some degree. So it makes sense to me that spread's widened a little bit in sympathy. I am starting to watch, though, if the Russell 2000 rolls over, because that to me is a good proxy for what's going on in high yield. What really did encourage me yesterday, we had some selling pressure on high yield, but the ETFs behaved very well. What I don't like is when you see the ETFs start trading at a big discount to NAV. That to me tells me there's an overwhelming amount of selling pressure. We didn't see that yesterday, clearly not seeing it today as the market does well. That's my one trigger to watch, is how the ETFs behave relative to NAV. And if they do well, that's healthy. And we will get a small correction credit spreads. You have to with equities down here, but there is no credit problem this time around.
What are you seeing in ETF flows? What gets your attention these days?
Again, just this continued buying into the kind of riskier end of equities. No one's giving up on the tech trade. No one's really giving up on the AI trade. And so every time I look and we see these sell-offs, I'm thinking, okay, maybe we got de-risking. And what I think we've been doing is getting de-grossing, which to me is people taking off longs and shorts. So that sometimes shows up as rotation. And I think people are taking off some of these more levered trades, the selling of options, et cetera. But we really haven't seen anyone say, I want out of this market. There's this real belief, I've got to hang in. Yeah. And that's what I'm waiting for, something that changes there. The only thing that I thought was neat, I'm starting to watch the Chinese stock market again. I actually kind of like FXI for the first time in a while on the ETF front.
Well, what's your level of confidence that we get that kind of event? That capitulation, event?
I think it's reasonably high. It's,
okay.
And part of it, like last Wednesday, right? We were up 500 on the NASDAQ last Wednesday as the Fed was speaking. I didn't see what justified that. So there was very little liquidity. That sucked people in. I think it helped set up for the Thursday, Friday, Monday trade. And here again, we're kind of rallying. Everyone seems too excited. There's no real fear. And the odds are, again, I think people are much more cautious on the earnings front, right? And people aren't getting the free pass, that something comes on that. And I really am very nervous that we've been overstating the economic growth, and we're going to see some weak data. So that's, I guess, my bet is we get a data or an earnings print that triggers another round of selling pressure, and people are too long once again.
You said you're looking at China. How about the Nikkei index? Our friends in Japan, a crazy couple of days.
Oh my God, yeah.
Man.
Yeah, and I do think that's been one problem we've been talking about for ages, is this faux liquidity, I've been trying to term it. And that these markets seem liquid because the screens are all priced, but it's all very algo driven. There's no real support at any given time, and you can have these big moves. It's, now that it's summer, if you go snorkeling or something, you see a school of fish and you put your hand near the fish, they disappear. They immediately recongregate. And this reminds me of the sort of pattern that we saw in around the financial crisis, these air pockets where something's trading normally, moves 5%, then starts trading normally again. Like, whoa, what happened to move 5%? And that to me shapes us up more for a downside than an upside.
So for the carry trade, so speaking of, is that how that winds up playing out? Like eventually there's even more upside pressure on the yen and then it just blows out other positions?
Yeah, so, the carry trade...
so define the carry trade.
So in theory, I think people say you borrow in yen, you keep it in yen, and you buy U.S. assets.
Gotcha.
I think, to me, it's just more there was leverage in the system, right? In the carry trade, more traditionally, you would buy you fund yourself in yen and buy U.S. Treasuries. Treasuries rallied yesterday. I think there's a little bit of a boogeyman sort of thing going on where the carry trade is just a small part of this. I think what it really is people got over-levered. They went to full positions. They went aggressive end of stocks. They bought leveraged ETFs. They did all these vol selling strategies. So I think it's leverage in the system, not a specific yen carry trade.
So it's not like I just borrowed in yen to buy NVIDIA.
No, and there's the thing, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you can picture him. So I don't know about you.
So
I
yes, maybe, but
I know
okay.
all sorts of people in this market. I can't find anyone who admits to having the carry trade on before this all started. So I think some of that's overstated. I think this is really just good old-fashioned leverage and people borrowing and putting too much risk into the market.
All right, Peter, great stuff. Really appreciate you coming in. Peter Cheer, Head of Macro Strategy at Academy Securities, joining us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Looking at yen right here, it's a little bit weaker today, 144.79. Remember, we were up at 160 and it changed there, so keep an eye on that. The Bloomberg Dollar Index, that is slightly higher, up about 0.2% here. I'm going to look at WTI crude oil because I know Alex Dale likes that. And that is up just fractionally here today, up about 50 cents, just above about $73.45. Bitcoin, for Matt Miller out there listening, up 2.8%, 55,900. We bounced off that 50,000 level yesterday that Mike McGlone was telling us about. With our news in New York City, here's John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Alex, Vice President Kamala Harris tapping Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern says he seems to balance the ticket.
He is seen as someone who can effectively communicate to the rural America. He has this rural American charm. A few weeks ago, there was a video that really went viral of him wearing a military-style baseball cap, ammo cap, and a Springsteen T-shirt, but didn't look like he was trying to placate to everyday Americans. Looked like actually this is who he is. He speaks normal to America. So this is someone that I think she thinks can help with the Rust Belt, even though Minnesota is blue.
Kamala Harris will kick off a 7-state battleground tour this evening in Philadelphia with Walz. There's a new poll out in New York. The Siena College survey of voters finds Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump 53 to 39% in New York. Well, Debbie is now a killer, downgraded from hurricane to tropical storm. It damaged homes and businesses, sent floodwaters rising, caused sweeping power outages across Florida and Georgia, and led to several fatalities. In Georgia, the mayor of Savannah issued a curfew.
It's going to catch a whole lot of people by surprise.
And Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn tracking the storm.
John, Tropical Storm Debbie is located on the coast of Georgia this morning, and this system is going to be responsible for some very heavy rainfall over the eastern Carolinas and Georgia over the next several days. Some places are going to receive in excess of 2 feet of rain from this system.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolyn. Hezbollah and Israeli forces again exchanged fire today as tensions rise with the Lebanese militant group and its sponsor Iran threatening to attack the Jewish state more forcefully. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whatever you wanted with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg after the worst rout in almost 2 years. We've got stocks advancing. All major groups in the S&P 500 are higher. Stocks gaining as dip buyers wade back into the market with the S&P off session highs, but still up 64 points now, up by 1.2%. The Dow up 293 points, up 0.8%. Right now, the Dow's at 38,994. NASDAQ is up 186 points, up by 1.1%, while the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up 0.8%. The 10-year 3.86%, the 2-year 4.00%. Now we've got gold down 1.2%, 23.82 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 73.34 a barrel. U.S. exports are up, and with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Foreign demand for American goods and services rose by the most in 5 months in June. That caused the trade deficit to narrow for the first time in 3 months. The export gain was natural gas and autos. U.S. imports also rose in June, though at a slower pace. Looking ahead, Bloomberg Economics sees a weaker dollar bolstering net exports as the Federal Reserve moves to trim interest rates. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Speaking of exports, Caterpillar shares higher by 2.9%. Cat this morning saying its annual profit will probably be higher than previously expected. Again, recapping here, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. We are calling it Turnaround Tuesday. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
There we go. There we go, Charlie. Turnaround Tuesday. Technically, it's also a thing. If you have a rally Thursday or a sell-off Thursday, Friday, Monday, there is a thing called Turnaround Tuesday. The question is, how long does that last? That's Charlie Pellet. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, where we bring you all the top news in business and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries. And we're going to go to one of them right now. Chris Ciolino is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. Machinery Analyst, and he joins us on Caterpillar. Charlie was just talking about it, saying the company said its annual profit will probably be higher than previously expected. Some good news in an industrial company that makes the machinery and the stuff that people use. Potentially a good sign. Hey, Chris, what did you make of the quarter?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of positives to take away from this report, and I think investors could probably, breathe a little sigh of relief. The margins were really quite impressive. I mean, they were up more than 100 basis points, even with the softer top line this quarter, with better than expected profitability, really across all of its businesses, with particular strength in the energy and transportation unit. Again, that really continues to be a big driver for them. We saw dealer inventories come down kind of a little bit more than we normally seasonally would, which is a positive sign. And then also the backlog improved sequentially, which I think will probably help alleviate some of those fears around a more severe slowdown and inventory build, which has been a big concern among investors.
Chris, talk about geography. Are there any pockets of strength or notable weakness around the world?
Yeah, so if you think, Europe has been weak for Cat for quite some time. We're starting to hear of some potential green shoots over there, but, I think Cat kind of dispelled some of those, that it's a little too early for talk of a recovery there. So kind of bouncing along the bottom. China obviously continues to be at pretty depressed levels. Historically, China's been 5 to 10% of consolidated revenue at Cat. Will be well below that 5% lower end of the band this year. And then North America, while some of the retail numbers this quarter were a little bit softer than they had anticipated, particularly with some of the rental dealers not maybe restocking as much as they had anticipated. That continues to probably be the most resilient area of the business for Caterpillar this year. But I'd also call out, actually, Latin America was surprisingly strong this quarter on the back of Brazil.
Brazil mining, I'm guessing? Is that what's going on there?
It was broad-based. I wouldn't make too much of it because, Latin America is quite small in the overall mix of Caterpillar. I mean, Latin America is roughly 10%, even a little less of the overall business. But it was a little surprising to see kind of broad strength down there.
So how much visibility does a company like Caterpillar have, Chris? And what are they saying about their visibility?
Yeah, so the backlog increased sequentially here, about 2.5% in the quarter. We're almost at $29 billion. That gives them roughly, 3 months of coverage, a little bit longer, with longer lead time products like some of the energy and transportation products. Those have much longer lead time, but think of it as roughly 3 months. Orders did come down a touch in the quarter, but we saw some sequential improvement there. No signs of really kind of a more precipitous decline, which I think has been a concern, just given some of the prints that we've seen from some other machinery names that really brought down their construction outlooks for the year. That really doesn't seem to be the case here.
So that's sort of their top line. How did they manage their cost profile, margins, et cetera?
Margins were phenomenal, and I think that's the big takeaway. Yeah, I mean, if you look at energy and transportation, one, pricing continues to be the biggest driver of the margin performance for the enterprise overall. But if you look into the energy and transportation unit, margins well ahead of the street. That is pricing and a little bit favorable mix. You also have lower freight costs, you have lower material costs, and the execution here continues to be quite good. So I'd expect that strength really to continue throughout the balance of the year. And as you alluded to earlier, while Caterpillar doesn't give explicit guidance, they're basically telling us that this year is going to be a lot stronger than they had anticipated, with margins above their long-term framework. Earnings are going to be stronger than they had anticipated even coming into the quarter. So certainly the margin performance it was quite good.
Chris, how about the competitive landscape out there? Who does CAT compete with, and how's that share game going globally?
It's there's a number of regional players, Komatsu being the biggest one over in Japan, but they're a big competitor here in the United States, particularly on the mining side, but also construction. You have Volvo, CNH Industrial, and then obviously Deere here in the United States that kind of round out more of the local construction peers. There's a number of other players in Asia, whether it be Hitachi and a few others. But it's really, Caterpillar is the market leader. And really, if you think about mining, it's essentially a duopoly in the mining truck business with them and Komatsu.
When we take a look at what Caterpillar tracks, I'm thinking, I like looking at it because it feels like a nice global growth barometer. Is it a global growth barometer? Like, if earnings grow at Caterpillar and their outlook is good, does that mean the global GDP is good? What's your correlation for that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is a global economic bellwether. Half the business is still here in North America, but you think of it roughly 20% EMEA and 20% Asia, and then Latin America, like I said, down around roughly 10% of the business. But it certainly is a bellwether for economic growth, and North America continues to be probably one of the more resilient regions globally because of all this infrastructure spending that we have. That has certainly kind of offset some of the weakness on the commercial side of the business. And then obviously it seems like we're, kind of approaching a bottom on the residential side. So maybe that provides a tailwind as we move into 25.
Hey, Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Chris Ciolino, Senior U.S. Machinery Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Just when you talk about a company's earnings, the greatest new addition, I think, to the Bloomberg terminal is MODL. It stands for model, and it puts up there kind of consensus street estimates. You can go break it down by individual investment bank. But then it just kind of shows you where the consensus is looking for a whole number of line items, not just revenue and EPS, but everything that makes it up. And then when the actuals come in, you can kind of see where the actuals are versus the consensus. And
Wait, stop. I didn't know this.
Exactly. Thank you.
That's a lot of numbers in there.
That's a lot of numbers.
But when you break earnings, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Or you want to learn, do expectations.
Yeah, a lot of people at Bloomberg took many, many years to kind of get this done. We had to work with our sell-side clients and customers on the sell side to get access to their models as well. But it just gives clients a real sense of kind of where the street's looking for some key metrics here, not just EPS and revenue. So it's good stuff there. MODL, put it in there for any ticker, and you can kind of see how the street is looking for future earnings and where the companies are coming in. So good stuff there. S&P 500 up 1.5%. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We are keeping an eye on Palantir Technology shares. They are advancing after earnings. Palantir now up by 12.2%. The company raised its annual outlook, citing continuing demand for its AI software. And in a call with analysts, Palantir CEO Alex Karp said the earnings report was a historic one for the company, which provides data analysis tools to companies and governments, including for defense and intelligence purposes. Palantir right now, they're based in Denver, up by 12.4%. Uber Technologies out with better than expected orders in the second quarter. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Dan Schwartzman.
Charlie, it underscores the continued strength in demand for rideshare and delivery services. Uber said gross bookings, which include ride hails, delivery orders, and driver and merchant earnings, but not tips, grew 19% to $39.95 billion in the 3 months ended June 30th. Analysts forecast $39.7 billion, according to Bloomberg compiled estimates. The strength in Uber's results was driven by better-than-expected growth in its ride-hailing business, especially in Latin America and the Asia-Pacific region. Rival Lyft reports tomorrow. Charlie?
And that's Dan Schwartzman reporting Uber shares are up now by 8.6%. Dan alluded to Lyft, and that stock up now by 2.1%. Yum Brands higher after the owner of KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell maintained its profitability goal in spite of slower than expected sales. The company says it still expects to post core operating profit growth in line with its 8% target this year. Yum Brands, they're advancing now by, shares are advancing now by 4%. Yum now at 138.62. And those are some of our top company stories at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy Turnaround Tuesday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We are broadcasting to you live from our interactive broker studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. We keep you up to date on all the news you need in business and finance and economics, and also world and national news. And for that, we go to John Tucker. John?
All right, Alex, let's start with Vice President Kamala Harris picking Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate, looking to strengthen the Democratic ticket in Midwestern states. She'll introduce Walz at a rally this evening in Philadelphia. And Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller says Walz is the safe choice.
Kamala Harris chose the most, quote-unquote, neutral within the Democratic Party. In other words, nobody who had any baggage with key constituencies like the unions, like people who are very passionate about Israel, Gaza. I think that and school choice, particularly the teachers' unions, in terms of vouchers like Josh Shapiro. So she went with the person who will do no harm.
Brown University political science professor Wendy Schiller. Some Republicans already reacting. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis called it the most left-wing ticket in American history. The deluge from Debbie has been destructive. The Category 1 hurricane downgraded back to tropical storm status, but it's the meandering movement as it travels northward that has made for serious problems in low-lying cities along the southeast seaboard. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolan is tracking the storm.
Tropical storm Debbie now located about 50 miles southwest of Savannah, Georgia. It is moving off to the northeast at about 7 miles an hour. Top winds in Debbie now 45 miles an hour. Again, the big threat with Debbie is going to be flash flooding across eastern Georgia, parts of the Carolinas. Over the next several days, Debbie will be moving back out into the Atlantic later this morning and could regain some strength. But again, the big problem with the system is because it's stalled off the coast of the Carolinas and Georgia the next few days, very heavy rain will continue. I'm Rob Carolan, Bloomberg Radio.
And 7 months after an almost new Boeing 737 MAX 9 aircraft lost a large fuselage panel during flight, safety investigators are conducting an extensive hearing to uncover any remaining mysteries. The National Transportation Safety Board is getting an opportunity to grill executives from the plane maker and their supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, which builds the 737 MAX fuselages for 20 hours, stretched over today and Wednesday. Global news, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker. This is Bloomberg. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate that. As a longtime, watcher of the media industry, working in the media industry, broadcasting and cable magazine was the Bible. It was really something that you really wanted to go to. Broadcasting and cable magazine made its debut in 1931 as Broadcasting Magazine, is officially no more. I saw this in the social media of Joe Flint. Joe Flint covers the media industry for the Wall Street Journal, really one of the best. He's done it for decades. And he posted that. So that kind of gets your attention. It was considered the Bible of TV and radio. And it just, I think it just mirrors the demise, the decline of radio industry, television industry, cable TV industry. They're just not as big businesses as used to be. Not as many people are interested in them. Now we're all kind of going to streaming. It's kind of sad.
And the help wanted ads, they were primo.
Yes.
I think I got one of my jobs looking at the back of the magazine.
Were you there with like the circle and like outlining?
Exactly, with the red pen.
Exactly.
Wow, old
And as an
school
analyst on Wall Street, you really wanted to get quoted there. It was as big as getting quoted in Bloomberg or the Journal, getting quoted because you knew all the executives of the media companies read that as kind of their Bible.
So as streaming took over, they couldn't like do streaming stuff too? It doesn't work like that?
They probably tried. I don't know. I haven't, again, having been out of the business for a while, I haven't kept up with it, but it just kind of, it's, kind of gone the way to Reader's Digest magazine.
Reader's Digest. I loved TV Guide.
Exactly.
I loved me TV Guide.
One of the nicest corporate campuses I've ever seen was Reader's Digest up in Westchester, New York.
Pleasantville?
Pleasantville.
New York.
Old school. They had an art collection that was worth, hundreds of millions of dollars, and when they sold the company, that was a big part of their assets. So anyway, Broadcasting Cable Magazine.
Yeah.
No more.
I mean, how else would I know when Golden Girls was on? All right. That wraps it up for Paul and me on this Turnaround Tuesday. You're looking at the Dow Jones still up by 1%, the S&P up by 1.6%, the NASDAQ up by 1.7%. Volume is a little bit mixed compared to what we've had over the last couple days. Balance of Power with Joe Matthew is up next.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Kamala Harris chooses the progressive governor. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the vice president names Minnesota's Tim Walz as her running mate. That's the pick today, making the new ticket complete. Joining us to discuss the strategy and the optics against a Trump-Vance ticket over the next hour, Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison, political science professor Andra Gillespie at Emory University, Brad Howard, the founder of Corcoran Street Group, and, of course, our signature panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. The conversation all after a look at Wall Street. In better shape this time than it was yesterday. Charlie Pallett has that in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Absolutely right about that, Joe Matthew. What a difference 24 hours makes. We have got stocks higher. Got to keep in mind, we are not making up yesterday's selling. At one point, we had the Dow down more than 1,000 points. Right now, Dow Industrials up by 460 points, gain of 1.2%. As you correctly observed, though, very different tone to the market today. Stocks rising, dip buyers coming back into the market. S&P up 90, best level of the day right now, up 1.7%. We got NASDAQ up 289, up by 1.8%. NASDAQ up 1.9% right now, and the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares up by 1.2%. Your 10-year, 3.86%. The 2-year, 4.00%. Gold down $22 the ounce to $23.88, a drop right now of 0.9%, while West Texas Intermediate crude is up 0.9%. As for the overall market backdrop, Jim Caron is Chief Investment Officer for Cross Asset Solutions at Morgan Stanley Investment Management.
I think that this is somewhat overdone. Doesn't mean that we can't go down, but if it does, I still think that we are in more of a secular bull market. This is not the start of a bear market, and we are going to be looking at opportunities to add to risk.
Jim Caron of Morgan Stanley Investment Management. As for some of the hard-hit tech names yesterday, we had NVIDIA up today by 4.9%. Apple in the red, down 0.3%. Microsoft up 2.5%. Tesla up today by just about 0.4%. So again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing at or near session highs right now. S&P up by 1.7%. Balance of power continues. Lots going on. Once again, here's your host, Joe Matthew.
You said it, Charlie. We thank you as always. I'll tell you what, Charlie, I don't know if we're calling this, I haven't heard you use the term dead cat bounce yet today, if this is the most convincing bounce back or not, but based on the action you're seeing in the stock market here today, can we not conclude that much, if not all of this, was about that carried trade that was a Japanese phenomenon, not an American one? Can't hear Charlie, but...
Call it a dead bear bounce, given some of the news stories that you guys were running yesterday. The answer is, truthfully, there were a number of factors. You look at how far this market had been ripping higher. A lot of people tell you we were long overdue for some sort of a sell-off. Indeed, today, I was really not surprised by the gains that we're seeing. You had Goldman's David Kostin saying buying shares after a slump is typically a good thing when you get a sell-off like the magnitude we had Monday. Since 1980, according to Kostin, the S&P has generated a median return of 6% in the 3 months that followed a 5% decline from a recent high. So bottom line here, Joe, long-winded answer, I know. A lot of factors contributed to yesterday's sell-off. And I've got to ask you a question in terms of the politics going on. When we had the announcement out of Washington, out of the Harris campaign today, and also out of Minnesota, how much of a shock, how much was a surprise was the name Waltz? Because that was not a name that you guys seem to be talking a lot about on the Balance of Power.
Well, geez, maybe that's our fault. He was on, all the short lists. The tip sheets this morning were indicating that the campaign might be turning away from Governor Shapiro and toward Tim Walz. He coined that whole weird thing. If you remember that a couple of weeks ago, Charlie, that they just started to call the Trump campaign J.D. Vance weird, and it caught on throughout the Democratic conversation here, and he's, I guess, a champion on social media. Look, a lot of folks saw him as a dark horse candidate here, but as we're going to discuss with Laura Davison in a minute, all the candidates had certain drawbacks, and a lot of people see this as the safe choice, I guess, Charlie.
Indeed. And what I want to know from your producers, how soon until Bloomberg has an exclusive interview with him?
I'll be asking, of course. We'll be in Chicago with the ticket, and that'll be an interesting moment for us, too. The big countdown begins here. Charlie Pellet, thank you. The sprint begins to Chicago and beyond. Yes, sir. We'll talk a little bit later on this hour with Charlie to keep tabs on this day after on Wall Street. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Indeed, Laura Davison is with us, Bloomberg Politics editor, who was up early checking the phone. What, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock? That's when I started. Like, really? We haven't found out yet?
It was a late night and then an early morning.
I bet it was for you. So this unfolded in an interesting way, unexpected. I thought we were going to wake up to a social media video. That was kind of the thought yesterday. Still don't have a video. This was leaked through the media. Did the people on the short list even know?
So here's kind of what we know. This was a very last-minute decision. When Harris went to bed last night, she did not yet know who she was going to pick. She was down to Shapiro and Tim Walz, and she woke up this morning and decided, okay, she was going to land on Walz, but didn't call anybody until about 10 o'clock. And it was, around, 8:45, 9 o'clock that CNN, AP, Bloomberg, and others started reporting, hey, look, this is who it's going to be. Right. So this is perhaps not how the campaign wanted it to be. Trump, just a few weeks ago, very famously was able to keep this under lock and key until he truthed it out. But she'll have the big reveal later tonight at this rally in Philadelphia. We expect that there will be a video there, showing off the candidate and kind of showing the first glimpse into what the messaging will look like.
Well, she finally kicked out a statement, right, on social media, but you wonder, was the intent to roll him out on stage, or was there going to be some other fireworks today?
It very well could be. I mean, so even last night, they were, preparing two drafts of speeches, whether it was Walz or Shapiro. They were also printing multiple signs, so it could be, Harris, Walz, Harris, Shapiro, in the rally tonight. So they, were prepared for the potential that, Harris might either not decide or that they were able to keep this under wraps, for quite some time.
Fascinating. So tell us a little bit about, as Charlie mentioned, not everyone has even heard of Tim Walz, and it's Walz, not Waltz, right?
Correct.
As we bring everybody up to speed on this.
The four walls around us.
I like that. The walls are closing in. This is someone who's had a long career. We're going to hear about the coach, hear about the teacher, hear hear about the member of the Army National Guard, but when it comes to politics, not just a governor, but a 6-term congressman.
Yeah, he's had a long career, but not a kind of a traditional path for someone who's sort of on the path to being a president or even a vice president. He was kind of a latecomer to politics. He did serve 12 years in the House. Was served in leadership on the Agriculture Committee, but wasn't sort of a big person out there on cable news making a big name for himself. But he's very well liked within the state of Pennsylvania, or sorry, within the state of Minnesota, where he's governor. Lots of support there. But he really kind of made a name for himself just about a couple weeks ago, once Harris really came onto the scene as the candidate, and he coined this whole, that Trump and the Republicans are weird. This has really caught on. It's really showed that he has an ability to be affable, to be likable, but also go on the attack. And that's one of the things that, as they were looking at candidates of, who can we find someone that's a coalition builder, that appeals to progressives, but also appeals to Midwesterners, to moderate voters. The district that he represented, for 12 years is now represented by a Republican. It's a rural district. It's conservative. So he's able to code switch and talk across audiences that way.
So it's not Josh Shapiro, which a lot of folks thought they were going to hear. The governor of Pennsylvania, the first big rally is in Pennsylvania today. I wonder, by the way, if the governor is going to be there or in the front row or how that's going to work. But a really, maybe weird is the word to use, statement from him upon the news that he was not selected. He said, for Kamala Harris, this decision was very personal, and for me, it was too. And I have much left to get done as the governor of Pennsylvania, almost as if they mutually agreed that he should not be the running mate. Is that the way you do this?
Well, there's some messaging coming from the Shapiro camp that, he still really wants to be governor, that he, has a lot left to do. He's only been in the seat since 2022. Whether this is true or this is sort of cleanup will remain to be seen. But, he's at least, sort of kind of turning the page and saying, look, I'll be an advocate for the ticket, because they'll need him, whether he's on the ticket or not. Pennsylvania is sort of still the name of the game, and still a state that the Walz-Harris ticket will have to go after.
Bloomberg Politics editor Laura Davison, great to have you on the day of the big pick. Laura, thank you so much for being with us at the table here on Balance of Power. As we add the voice of Andra Gillespie, professor of political science at Emory University. Professor, it's great to have you. Before I ask you about Tim Walz and this selection, I just want to finish with what we were discussing there with Laura, and that's the idea that Josh Shapiro was the wrong pick. He was getting beat up for weeks about labor, about Israel, about a number of issues that had progressives concerned, and Tim Walz is apparently the antidote to all of those things. Why do you think she looked past the governor of Pennsylvania? Because we also heard about his personality. John Fetterman said he was too ambitious. He might primary Kamala Harris in 2028. Is that the real problem, or was that the real problem with him?
Well, I have no way of knowing that, so I won't speculate about those issues. What I will consider are all the pluses and minuses of each of the candidates in the way that Tim Walz checks off boxes that Vice President Harris thinks are important. When you're making a vice presidential choice, vice presidential candidates rarely make enough of a dent to actually help a candidate win an election. So people have been studying this for decades, and some of the earliest estimates suggested that perhaps you get a slight bump in the vice presidential nominee's home state. It may not be enough to make a difference in a presidential outcome unless it's a razor thin outcome. But people do look for things like balancing out the ticket and working well together. Only Vice President Harris and the people whom she interviewed can talk about what their chemistry was, but we can look at some of the ways that Tim Walz ostensibly balances out the ticket in ways that Josh Shapiro did not. So Tim Walz is somebody who is very well received by progressives in the Democratic Party, but his manner speaks very much to folks who are in the middle, that Midwestern plain-spokenness, just the idea of the invocation of weird as actually being an effective attack line against the Trump-Vance machine is something that, seems really natural to him as a Midwesterner. He really does kind of embody everyman populism. He's somebody who was not, a lawyer. He's not a business person. He was a high school teacher and a football coach, right? He served in the military as an enlisted person. He served in Congress where he was bipartisan and where he won in a district that was Republican. So he actually can satisfy progressives, and I think that he can make a strong case for being able to reach out to folks in the middle. He's got federal experience, and he's from the Midwest. And so Josh Shapiro brought a lot of strengths to a possible ticket with Kamala Harris, but one of the things that he couldn't bring was Midwestern balance, or looking at the middle of the country instead of sort of thinking about that problem that Democrats have, currently have sort of in recent history of being perceived as being the party of coastal elites. Bringing somebody in from Minnesota who grew up in Nebraska on a farm, I think really does kind of speak to some of those attacks and might cause some folks in the middle to give the ticket a second look, even though at the end of the day, people are going to decide based on Kamala Harris and on Donald Trump and not on J.D. Vance.
Well,
and
that's one of the
Tim
smartest
Walz.
answers. One of the smartest answers I've heard yet. Midwestern balance, suggesting, Professor, that geography does matter, but not in the most obvious way that we think about with a governor delivering his or her own state. It's a different, more nuanced dynamic. And with that in mind, I'll ask you what it will be to put him on stage with J.D. Vance, if in fact there's a vice presidential debate. J.D. Vance spoke earlier today. He was on his jet. I actually called Tim Walz. He said, I left a voicemail, didn't get him, told him congratulations, it'll be a good ride. Maybe he'll call me back, maybe he won't. Should Tim Walz return that phone call, and should these two debate?
Well, I think the two should debate. I think it remains to be seen. I don't know if it harms, either candidacy one way or the other. By putting somebody who's older, whose populist roots are not going to be called into question, it actually does, in some ways, at least call out Donald Trump's choice of J.D. Vance as a spokesperson for the everyday working person. Tim Walz can more than hold his own against J.D. Vance, and it would be really interesting to see them kind of talking, in a debate and debating on those kinds of issues. I think in those particular instances, what Harris is betting on is that Walz's age is actually an advantage here. So you get the extra 20 years of life experience. You get somebody whose career did kind of, before he went into politics, focused on normal everyday politics. Whereas when J.D. Vance went to law school, he then goes off into kind of sort of, high-end business. And, and it was coming with a pedigree from Yale Law School. So I think in many ways, like, the balance is actually also a counter to what Donald Trump was hoping to achieve by selecting J.D. Vance as his spokesperson.
You talk about Midwestern balance, rural sensibility might be another way to look at it. He didn't move to St. Paul until he won the governor's race. It's going to be interesting to see these two out on the road together. Professor, they're going to be followed by J.D. Vance over the course of the next 4 stops or something like that on the road tour this week. How will Tim Walz be framed? They're going to have a video and so forth. He's going to be introduced. There's going to be a lot of people yelling and a big standing ovation. But how will he be framed by the campaign? Is it this way that we're talking?